New York State Racing, Parimutuel Wagering, and Breeding Law, Section 102, provides that the New York State Gaming Commission shall consist of 7 members appointed by the governor, by and with the advice and consent of the Senate. 4 members confirmed by the New York State Senate are necessary to afford the Commission an ability to establish quorum and undertake action. This present meeting of the Commission is now called to order. Ms. Secretary, will you please call the roll?
John Karati.
Here.
Peter Machete.
Here.
John Baclemba.
Here.
Barry Sample.
Here.
Jerry Skurnick.
Here.
Todd Snyder.
Here.
Ms. Secretary, please have the record reflect that a quorum of qualified members is present, thus enabling the transaction of business. Chairman Sample expects to leave the meeting prior to its conclusion today and thus requested that Commissioner Baclemba preside over today's meeting. Unless there is an objection, Commissioner Baclemba?
Thank you, Rob. Consideration of minutes for the meeting of April 29th. Minutes of the commission meeting conducted on April 29th, 2019 have been provided to the members in advance. At this time, I'd like to ask the members if there are any edits, corrections, or amendments.
Meeting was that?
Hearing none, Ms. Secretary, please let the record reflect that the minutes were accepted. Moving on to rule making. New York State Racing, Parimutuel Wagering, and Breeding Law, Section 104.19, authorizes the Commission to promulgate rules and regulations that it deems necessary to carry out its responsibilities. To that regard, the Commission will from time to time promulgate rules and rule amendments pursuant to the State Administrative Procedure Act. Today we have 2 items for consideration. Rob, will you please outline the first item?
Certainly. For Commission consideration is the adoption of a proposed rulemaking to allow sports wagering at gaming facilities pursuant to Article 13 of the Racing, Parimutuel Wagering, and Breeding Law. The intention of these rules is to provide a solid regulatory structure that would enable the 4 facilities to become operational as soon as practicable, with the idea that novel or unique concepts and ideas can be visited at a future date. The proposed regulations seek to protect the integrity of the wagering and underlying contests and ensure that the sports wagering remains within the scope of activity the legislature authorized. The regulations set forth a similar regulatory framework as those in states that regulate sports wagering. The proposal is also consistent with existing Commission authority related to licensed commercial casinos. This proposal contains definitions applicable to sports wagering and addresses such items as licensing, lounge and system requirements, wager types, pool integrity provisions, compliance, and responsible gaming elements. The Commission received 19 comments, which contained approximately 80 specific suggestions or recommendations. All recommendations and suggestions have been addressed individually within the staff memorandum that has been provided. For expediency, I will address only those comments wherein staff agreed with the commentator and recommended an amendment or revision to the proposed regulations. The law firm of Allen and Denoyer submitted 26 suggestions or recommendations that encompass such topics as definitions, wagering locations, and voucher expiration. They also provided several observations or suggested language changes. Commission staff believed 3 suggestions necessitated a recommendation to amend or revise the proposed regulations in the manner suggested. In Section 5329.9A, they noted a typographical error. In Section 5329.10G5, the commentator suggested that the reference to the permit holder was unclear and should be changed to the voucher holder. Staff agreed that a wording change was appropriate, but that permit holder should be changed to gaming facility. And in Section 5329.11J4, the commentator suggested eliminating a reference to racetracks. The staff agreed. American Wagering, Inc., doing business as William Hill, U.S., submitted 15 suggestions or recommendations that encompassed such topics as wager rescission, information sharing, and definitions. They also provided several observations or language changes. Commission staff believe that 2 suggestions necessitated a recommendation to amend or revise the proposed regulations in the manner suggested. In Section 5329.9B2, Romanet 3, The commentator suggested threshold for a segregated booth for cashier's cashing be lowered to $10,000 to better protect patron privacy and increase security. Staff agreed. In section 5329.16B, the commentator suggested eliminating the requirement that the operator's surveillance system maintain visibility of the display of available wagering information. Staff too agreed. Rivers Resorts and Casino in Schenectady submitted 13 comments that encompass such topics as variances, reporting requirements, and definitions. They too also provided several suggestions or observations regarding language changes. Commission believed that 4 comments necessitated a recommendation to revise or amend the proposed regulations in the manner suggested. In section 5329.9A, 5329.7A, and 5329.36A, the commentator identified typographical errors. The staff agreed. In section 5329.11J4, the commentator suggested eliminating a reference to racetracks, which the staff agreed. In sections 5329.20C and 5329.20D, the commentator suggested that the redeemed wagering tickets be permitted to be branded as redeemed in an electronic manner and requested that an electronic record of a redeemed ticket suffice for record keeping. Staff agreed that procedures other than a physical marking of the wagering ticket, if approved by the Commission, would satisfy the objective ensuring that the wager is not cashed more than once, and recommended clarifying language to that effect. Additionally, staff also agreed that an electronic record of cashed wagering tickets would be sufficient and recommended clarifying language to that effect. In section 5329.24, the commentator suggested that the cash reserve amount be set by the sports pool operator and approved by the Commission instead of the amount being determined by the Commission. The staff also agreed. The Seneca Gaming Corporation submitted 16 comments that encompass such topics as counting money and paperwork. They also provided several observations or suggested language changes. Commission staff believed that 1 comment necessitated a recommendation to amend or revise the proposed regulations in the manner suggested. In section 5329.20C, the commentator suggested that the requirement to mark every wagering ticket was unnecessary. As we did with Rivers, we agreed here. Finally, in addition to the changes recommended in response to the public comments, staff also identified several clarifying and stylistic corrections. These recommendations, and those previously discussed, have been included in your proposed amended language, which is presently before you. None of the recommended changes are substantial and can be made upon the filing of a notice of adoption without triggering a regulation reproposal. Staff recommends adoption of this rule proposal.
Commissioners, do you have any questions on the adoption of the proposed sports wagering at gambling facilities rule? Hearing none, may I have a motion to adopt the rule?
So moved.
Motion by Chairman Sample, second by Commissioner Crotty. Any discussion on the motion? All in favor?
Aye.
The motion is approved. Next item, Rob?
For Commission consideration is adoption of a proposed rulemaking to allow for necessary regulatory changes to be effective to prevent operational cessation of Cash for Life. Cash for Life is an existing lottery draw game offered by 9 states wherein players pick 5 ball numbers between 1 and 60 from a main field, plus 1 number from a secondary field of 1 through 4. The operational aspects of Cash for Life are controlled by an agreement among the participating states. New York has offered Cash for Life since June of 2014. The participating states have advanced rule proposals changing the frequency of drawings from 2 per week to daily and adjusting description of the maximum length of subscriptions accordingly. These changes will take effect for the July 1st, 2019 drawing. New York must conform its rules to the group's rules to continue to offer the game. In addition to the frequency and subscription changes, several technical changes have been proposed for clarity and consistency. No public comments were received. Staff recommends that the Commission adopt this proposed rulemaking.
Thank you, Rob. Commissioners, any questions on the adoption of the proposed Cash for Life Amendment Rule? Hearing none, take a motion to
So moved.
adopt the rule.
So moved.
Motion by Commissioner Snyder, second.
Second.
Second by Commissioner Skernick. Any discussion on the motion? No discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
The motion carries. Next, we'll move to adjudications.
Today we have two items for adjudication. First, in the matter of Fredis Mendoza. On January 17, 2018, the Bureau of Licensing denied the application of Fredis Mendoza for a non-gaming registration to work as a cook at Resorts World Catskills. The denial cited New York Parimutuel Wagering and Breeding Law, Section 1318.1C, which provides for disqualification on the grounds of the conviction of the applicant of any offense in any jurisdiction which is or would be a felony or other crime involving public integrity, embezzlement, theft, fraud, or perjury. Mr. Mendoza requested a hearing which was conducted on February 6, 2019. The hearing officer submitted a report to the Commission Secretary dated May 13th, recommending that the registration denial be upheld. This matter is now ready for final agency determination. The Commission considered this matter at a meeting conducted pursuant to the judicial or quasi-judicial proceedings exemption of New York Public Officers Law, Section 108.1.
Thank you. The Commission duly deliberated and considered this matter and determined upon a vote of 6-0 to sustain the hearing officer's report and recommendations. Next item.
On January 30th, 2019, the Bureau of Licensing denied the application of Matthew Tolliver for a non-gaming registration to work as a steward at the Rivers Casino in Schenectady. The denial cited New York Racing, Parimutuel Wagering, and Breeding Law, Section 1318.1A, B, C, and D, which provide that the applicant must prove qualification by clear and convincing evidence and for disqualification on the grounds of failure of the applicant to provide information, documentation, and assurances required by this article or requested by the Commission, or failure of the applicant to reveal any fact material to qualification, or the supplying of information which is untrue or misleading as to a material fact pertaining to the qualification criteria, the conviction of the applicant of any offense in a jurisdiction which is or would be a felony or other crime involving public integrity, embezzlement, theft, fraud, or perjury, committed prior acts which have not been prosecuted, in which the applicant was not convicted but form a pattern of misconduct that make the applicant unsuitable for license under this article. Mr. Tolliver requested a hearing which was conducted on March 20th, 2019. The hearing officer submitted a report to the Commission Secretary dated May 20th, recommending that the registration denial be upheld. This matter is also ready for final agency determination. The Commission considered this matter at a meeting conducted pursuant to the judicial or quasi-judicial proceedings exemption of New York Public Officers Law, Section 108.1.
Thank you. The Commission again duly deliberated and considered this matter and determined upon a vote of 6-0 to sustain the hearing officer's report and recommendations. That concludes our adjudications. We'll next move on to old business. It is my understanding, Rob, that we have several matters to discuss.
Yes, we do. The first, if you remember, on January 28, 2019, the Commission unanimously adopted a proposed rule that would add flexibility to the thoroughbred claiming price rule on a case-by-case basis for all or a portion of a race meeting, while requiring the track to meet increased requirements to ensure competitiveness, soundness, and safety of the horses that enter such races. Last month, I provided a very brief overview of the results of the rule change through the Aqueduct Winter Meet. Today, we have with us the Commission's Equine Medical Director, Scott Palmer, to provide a more refined analytical presentation. Dr. Palmer, if you would.
Thank you. Thank you for having me here today. It's my pleasure to be here. And I just wanted to walk you through this review. This is the reason we're here today, as Rob said, is this rulemaking that was passed in January. And Commissioner Sample said to me, I'd like you to come back and talk to us in a few months and give us a report on what happened, see how it worked out. So that's what we're going to do today. So in this meeting, the Commission did approve, as Rob said, this regulation which allows flexibility for a racing association to hold claiming races with a purse ratio that could be greater than 2-to-1. The underlined portion of the slide shows you the most important piece of this, though, is that the Commission shall not approve this measure unless the association has implemented increased measures to ensure close examination of the competitiveness, soundness, and safety of each of the horses entered in such races. So that's why we're here today to review that. And here is how we start out. I think it's important to give you a little bit of background about all this because it's important to understand the way we've been managing these injuries over the years. So back in Aqueduct in 2011-12, there were 21 equine fatalities at the Aqueduct spring meet. This cluster of fatalities was unusual and more than twice the national average. It raised a great deal of concern among all the stakeholders in the industry, including Governor Cuomo, who indicated to NYRA that they needed to hire an independent investigator or team of investigators to review the circumstances involving these breakdowns, analyze the causes, and recommend necessary action to prevent equine fatalities in the future at NYRA facilities. So the task force had looked at this as about a 5-month period of time of this investigation. I was fortunate to be chairman of this task force, and we found that we felt that part of the issue was that there was a disproportionate increase in the purses for the lower level of claiming races, which in effect commoditized the horses. And that by putting them at increased risk, there was less risk aversion going on, and we felt as though it was important that these purses be adjusted. In this process, while the task force was investigating this, the Commission actually put an emergency measure in place to that effect. And this was what the Racing and Wagering Board did. They said that the horses entering in these races should not have a purse of more than 50% of the value of the horse. So what this meant was that it was going to, during the original part of the race meet, there were as many as the purse to claim ratio was as much as 4 times the value of the animal. And so people were taking inappropriate risks. The task force actually made a recommendation that the price to claim ratio be 1.6 instead of 2. This was discussed at some length. The reason for the 1.6 recommendation was that the winner of the race would essentially win the value of the horse. It would not exceed the value of the horse, the number one first place winning purse. There was some discussion about this, and there was a lot of controversy that ensued from that, and the suggestion was made that we should be a little bit more relaxed about this, and that we should go with the recommendation by the Racing and Wagering Board of a 2-to-1 ratio instead of 1.6 to 1. In discussion of this, the task force members approved that because, frankly, we had no scientific evidence to indicate there was any significant difference between 1.6 to 1 and 2 to 1. And so we put that measure in place. So at that time then, since that time, all of the open claiming races at NYRA have been conducted with this 2-to-1 purse to price ratio rule. So what happened? In December of 2018, the Commission received a formal request from NYRA to amend this purse to price rule to be competitive with other racetracks in the Mid-Atlantic region. The reasons that they argued for this amendment was, first of all, that we had 7 years of operation with good results from the task force recommendation, seemed to work pretty well. There was regional indifference to the issue, meaning the other racetracks in the Mid-Atlantic area did not follow this rule and had higher purse-to-claim ratios, and that seemed to work out okay for them. There were competitive issues for horsemen, and there was also the competitive issues for horsemen were that they were not able to race in New York for the same kind of purses that they could race within 1 day of shipping from a lot of other jurisdictions. And finally, there were substantial equine safety measures that we had put in place since 2011-12 that would accommodate this change in the rules safely.
Can I just make sure I understand the second bullet, the regional indifference point?
Mm-hmm.
What, you're saying that with different purse-to-claim ratios, they were having the same equine mortality experience?
They were not experiencing an increased rate of fatality in this group of races in the region around us. In other words, a horseman could race for a purse of $10,000 in New York, and he could race the same caliber race in another state like Pennsylvania for $12,500 or $15,000. So there was an inappropriate.
Without a change in the fatality rate?
That's right. That's right. That had not been observed. So when you look at this map, it just kind of illustrates there's a lot of racetracks in this area that people could go into, all the way from Laurel, Maryland, Delaware, Pennsylvania. There's a lot of options here, and a horseman can compete in any of these regions. And it was felt that it resonated with us that New York was at a disadvantage in this regard, both for the horsemen and for the Racing Association. So the commission did recognize the strategic benefits for horsemen in New York racing. However, as you all know, you were all very reluctant to remove a protective measure that seemed to be working and to take a risk that horses would be put at risk again. So that's why the new protective factors were required. And we checked back with all the task force, original task force members, and everybody supported the change. That was the first step. So if you look at this, we see here that the increased measures is what we're really talking about to ensure that the competitive soundness and safety of these horses. What do they look like? How specific, what do we really need to do to accomplish this? So, and why do we need to do this? So first of all, the why. The why is that there's some very good research that's shown that there's an increased amount of risk for catastrophic injury for horses in claiming races with a purse-to-price ratio greater than 1.8 to 1. This is a very sound piece of scientific information, and it supports the assumptions that we discussed earlier. As the purse levels exceed the claiming price of the horse, risk is incentivized and the horse becomes a commodity. That's the challenge, and that's what we had to find, this fine line, this balance, if you will, between increasing the economic opportunity but not having the horse pay the price for that. That's what we're trying to do here. So the increased measures essentially involve two levels of scrutiny. The first level of scrutiny is that which is already in place for every horse that races in every New York claiming race, and that involves a thorough examination before the race takes place. It involves, we'll get over that, there's some extra things if the horse is on vet's list or whatever, but we have a separate list of analysis that goes on to be applied only to these horses that have certain risk factors present. So these are the risk factors that we were looking at that trigger the increased measures. First of all, if they were entered in these enhanced purse races, if they did not start until they're 4 years of age, that's a big risk factor. Why didn't they do that? Ordinarily, they would have started when they were 2, 3 at the latest. Why 4 years old? If the horse has not raced in the last 6 months, what was the reason for that? Did the horse drop in more than one class? With 2 drops coming down into this race, why was that? Why the big change in class? Was there evidence of high-speed exercise intensity between the first recorded workout and the first start? Did the horse have multiple intra-articular medications administered within 2 weeks of the race? And these were all trigger points we felt were important that we should be looking at in this class of horses.
How do you define a drop in class?
So if a horse is racing, let's say
Like, what are the thresholds?
well, let's say you had 30,000, you're running for around 30, and then typically you could drop down into the 20 range, and then you go down into the 10 range. I mean, you just have to go down from
So going from 30 to 10?
30 to 10 would
drops,
definitely do it, yeah.
right? And 40 to 20?
40 that could be
That's
doing it
2
too,
drops.
sure. And I think also importantly that we were also looking at combinations of these factors. You had a horse who's a 4-year-old maiden,
Right.
that kind of thing. So that's really important. So the level 1 of scrutiny, this is basically that I mentioned earlier. All these horses get examined before the race, and they're not just looked at in the stall in the morning. They're looked at on their way to the paddock. They're looked at in the paddock. They're looked at the walking ring. They're watched out in the post parade, and they're looked at again before the end of the gate. So there's at least 6 levels of scrutiny that apply to these horses that go for every horse in New York. Now the other ones, the other 2 levels that we're talking about here, would apply to, in particular, horses that are on the steward's list or the vet's list. And these horses are horses that have an issue of some type. They could be lame, they could not just run well, there could be a number of reasons for that. But in order for them to race at the basic level of the scrutiny, is they have to complete a minimum number of workouts before they can be raced. They have to pass a pre-race inspection by a NYRA veterinarian, and also have a post-workout drug test to ensure that they didn't have any drugs on board when they did that workout. So that applies to every horse in these races. Now, if they're entering in these races with enhanced purses, they had to meet the second level of criteria. And that means that we've got all the horses with the risk-specific factors were evaluated, and the NYRA veterinarians knew about these things with computer printouts before they went to look at the horses in the morning. So when they went there in the morning, they had a list of concerns that they needed to be able to get answers to. These are questions that in the normal daily events would not necessarily be asked or even answered, or would not know the answer. But in these horses, there had to be someone there at the stall in the morning who had knowledge of the horse, so that the veterinarian, if on the report it had these risk factors noted, he could say, well, why did this horse not race, until he was 4? Why did he not race in the last 120 days? Why is he dropping a couple of classes? What was the diagnosis for which the multiple injections were given? Why did these things happen? And so that conversation goes forward, and if the answers are appropriate, then we go on. If the answers are not so appropriate, then there's another step in this process. So the additional review is for horses where the examining veterinarian has a concern. That examining veterinarian then can ask the supervising veterinarian or the chief examining veterinarian to undertake an additional examination based upon the answers to those questions. So we have another pair of eyes, another set of hands to look at the horse. And in addition, those veterinarians can require that the horse have, if he has abnormal clinical findings of sufficient concern, will have to be evaluated with diagnostic imaging, x-rays or ultrasounds, for example, if there's some big concern there that they want to work it out. So there's a number of levels to this extra scrutiny that were applied to every one of these horses. Okay, so this program was created and put into place, and let's see what happened. So at Aqueduct, these were the races that were approved for enhanced horses. And you can see that the ratio of the purse to price ranged from 2.25 to 3. And those are the races that were conducted at Aqueduct. And then we also had races conducted at Belmont in the same situation. Now, a lot of these are overlaps, but you notice that now we have a $20,000 claiming race in here. The purse was increased from 40 to 43,000. That was a 2.15 to 1 purse ratio change. So these were the races that were approved, and this is what happened. So first of all, there were 11 races conducted with enhanced purses during the Aqueduct meet, and so far in the current Belmont meet, there have been another 11 races conducted for a total of 22 races with enhanced purses. There were 142 horses were entered in these races. The average field size was 6.5 horses per race. 16 horses were scratched prior to racing. 1 horse did not finish and was vanned off the track with a non-fatal injury. There were no catastrophic injuries in any of these horses in any of these races thus far.
Doctor?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
6.5 compares to what it was to a regular claiming race?
Well, the average, it's about right. It's about the same. It's 6.4, 6.5, up to 6.7. There's a little bit of a range there, but that's pretty much normal.
The 16 scratches were the result of veterinary interaction?
14 of them were veterinary scratches. 1 was a steward scratch, and 1 was a trainer scratch. So most of them were veterinarian. Some of them, Rob's got some details over. Some of them were private veterinarian scratches. Some of them were regulatory veterinarian scratches. But I think one of the things that's important about this, it represents a bit of a higher number than ordinary. In most races, it's about an 11% scratch rate here, and that's a little high. So what that tells me is that NYRA was doing a really good job. They really had a hard eye on these horses, and they just took horses out if they had concerns. There was no chance that they were going to take on letting the horse run if they had concerns.
It doesn't, I'm sorry to interrupt, doesn't it also say that if given the opportunity, the owners and trainers will run their horses, and that you need to have this regulatory intervention, that we're basically creating the incentive that we didn't want to create,
Right.
and then we're creating a regulatory scheme to intervene to protect against it.
I think you could argue that. I don't know that I could compare that to regular races and make a distinct comparison to say this is different. But I think the point is well made that in roughly 10% of these horses, it was determined they really shouldn't run. And some of those determinations were made by the trainer, and rarely.
But in the regulatory scratches,
But the regulatory scratches were interventions. It is exactly why we had this program in place. And had these interventions not been in place, some of those horses could have been injured. That's speculation, of course.
Of course.
But the fact of the matter is that this process was working. To me, it was not that it was unnecessary. It was that this extra regulatory supervision was something that was working for us. Any other questions about that? So this is just a little bit more background about the meets in general. If you look at Aqueduct 2018 and 19 and compare that from what we've got so far through these meets, the fatality rate in 2018 at Aqueduct was 1.5 per thousand starts, and the fatality rate in 2019 was 0.86 per thousand starts. This is just to give you an indication that overall, there's a lot of progress being made in terms of the interventions, processes, and strategies. This is the risk management program in action that I might have mentioned to you earlier. This is what we do. We monitor injuries, we design interventions, we test those interventions, we readjust our interventions, and we continue to monitor again, and then we repeat that process. We do that every single day. So this is just another example of how, in the whole meet in general, not just the enhanced purse races. In fact, in 2018, there were no enhanced purse races. Okay, so this is really important to understand that this is a bigger picture here where things are really working out well. Just to give you a little more detail about that, if you look at the first 4 months of the Aqueduct meet, this is, the early part of the year, the weather is pretty terrible. But if you compare the 2018 year to 2019, again, you can see an enormous difference in safety.
What does it relate to in numbers?
Well, if you look over here to the left,
2018, how many fatalities?
yeah, the fatality rate was about 1.5
How
per
many
thousand.
fatalities?
I'd have to count them and go back and see.
Commissioner?
But
We had 10 in 2018, and in 2011, it was
About 19.
19. Yeah.
Is that the comparison?
What was today, as of today?
What, I'm sorry?
As of today.
I get that per
What's the
thousand.
number?
For money, as of today, it's 2019. I have to turn the page.
while he's looking it up, I will add, though, the numbers, the raw numbers, while interesting, are not nearly as important as the frequency. And the reason for that is that the raw numbers are going to be affected by the number of starts that we have.
Sure.
So that if you're making accurate comparisons from year to year, it's important that you control for that. And so that's why these numbers are more important than the raw numbers. In fact, we'll get them for you.
Sure.
3.
3 versus 18.
Mhm.
And you said there was 10 in the
10 from
in
11.
the first 4 months, he said there was 10, and then he's saying, in 18, he's saying there's 3 in 19. You're talking about the entire year.
No, no, I
I mean,
mean,
you said 18.
oh, 10 for the year.
Yeah.
I see, I see.
Yeah.
Meet the meet. Okay.
So that's the first 4 months, the early part of the year. So historically, again, when you go back and look at the April, the task force report was issued, and the effect of changing the personal emergency measure was put in place by the commission. And at that time of the adoption in April of 2012, there had been 32 racing fatalities. Following the adoption in April, for the remainder of the year, the 8 months of the year, there were only 16. So right off the bat, there was an improvement in that fatality rate. The safety went up quite a bit. Now, it's important, though, to understand that that purse-to-price rule change was not the only thing that happened, that there were a lot of interventions put in place, but that was certainly one of them. So when we look back on this historical perspective, I just wanted to give you kind of an overview. We're not going to go over all these things, but there were 39 recommendations in 9 different categories. Only one of the categories affected claiming races. So there's a lot of other things in play here. It's important to understand that racing injuries are multifactorial. There's not one silver bullet. There's not one thing that causes them. It's a combination of things. And if you don't have interventions in all these areas, you still have exposure for catastrophic injuries. If you look at the late winter numbers, this is January through March of 2012 compared to January, March of 2019. Again, we're looking at, the fatalities per 1,000 starts. A very dramatic reduction here. That's of course, a tough time of the year for horse racing. There's a lot going on there.
12 was the year the purses got increased though, right?
That's correct. 11, 12. That's right.
So
Yep.
the purses spiked, that's when you first had
That's
that
right.
major incident.
That's exactly right. Yeah. And again, I'd emphasize, that's not the whole story, but that was a big part of it. People ask me all the time about well, all these 39 recommendations, which ones were most important? And I think that's one of them. Getting that person-to-claim price ratio right was a big one. Other ones were medication control. It's another thing that we did. There's a lot of good things that happened in that regard. So those are just 2 of the ones that I think were probably the most important ones. This is looking at 2011, 2012 to 18. This is Aqueduct Racetrack again. So it's a little bit different time frame, but again, it shows you pretty much the same thing. It's just different ways of making these comparisons. This is an interesting slide because this is all of Dyer racetracks, 2012 versus 2018. So you have Aqueduct, Saratoga, and Belmont listed here, and we got a 50% reduction in racing fatalities. Very dramatic. And again, this is widespread effect of this racing quality control program that we have in place. This is all New York thoroughbred racetracks. This includes Finger Lakes. And again, when you look at the whole big picture, this quality control program that we've been working with for 7 years now is not a statistical fluke. We've reduced these injuries in the neighborhood of 42 to 50%, and it's been in that range for the last 7 years. That's not an accident. The thing I really want to leave you with here is that what does this really mean? Doesn't mean that there's anything supernatural going on here. It means that this is hard work. It means that this is something that we do every day, and it means that it works. It's no public relations campaign. These are the numbers. It works. It's a quality control program. We just keep grinding away at it every day, and over the last 7 years, this has been the result. And I can't tell you how pleased I am to be able to tell that to you, but it's a credit for a whole teamwork of people. There are thousands of people involved in making this happen, all across the industry in the state. And it's a very important thing, especially in the context of some of the things that are going on in California, and the frustration, and the anger, and the disappointment, and the fear that's resulted from that across the industry in the United States. We can look at what we've done here in New York for the past 7 years and say, this works. This is the way to manage your business. And if you take care of your business, this is the kind of results you can expect. So the improved safety record for the winter meet and spring meets at Aqueduct was a result of conscientious application of this evolving real-time risk management program. The use of enhanced security protocols successfully mitigated the increased risk associated with these claiming races with enhanced purse-to-price ratios. So where do we go from here? I expect that NYRA will continue to make requests for their condition book to modify these races, and Finger Lakes so far has not done that. The commission staff will continue to closely monitor all these races and make adjustments to the protocols as necessary to minimize risk of injury. I think that that's the way we're going to take this from now. I think you should feel comfortable about the decision you made in January. Now, and I think you should also be very comfortable about the fact that you insisted that there would be some extra measures put in place here. And clearly it worked. It's been a very effective tool. It's also got more money for the horsemen, put NYRA Racing in a more competitive position in the Mid-Atlantic region. So it's really a win-win-win for us, and I'm very pleased about that. I also want to take a moment to congratulate NYRA and everybody that worked so hard to put together this Belmont Racing Festival that we just completed. 33 races, perfect safety record, professionalism, integrity, safety. It was all right there. A beautiful job by a huge group of people. And the world was watching the Belmont Stakes. Don't think they weren't. And we put a stake in the ground for safety, integrity, and professionalism. And I just think those people deserve a lot of credit for that. So thank you very much. Any other questions?
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr.
Thank you
Beaumont.
very much.
Thank you, Doctor.
For your thorough presentation, and if you could convey the appreciation of the commission to you and your entire team for the hard work that you've been doing in this area. We really appreciate it.
I'll do that. Thank you very much.
Thank you,
Are there
Doctor.
any other questions for the doctor? Okay, then, moving on to the next item, Rob?
Sure. Last time here, last month, several commissioners requested staff survey relevant industry participants, such as breeders' organizations, horsemen's organizations, owners group, racetrack management, and practicing veterinarians representing both breeds to gauge support for a rule change that would be consistent with the proposals being advanced by the Stronach Group and others. Accordingly, staff sent approximately 150 letters to each racetrack's management, racing office, and chief veterinarians, all recognized horsemen's organizations, standardbred and thoroughbred breeder organizations, and the state's leading standardbred and thoroughbred breeders and trainers. To ensure full participation, we were looking for a response date within 3 weeks of the letter, which is just recently closed, and overall we received 17 comments. The first glance finds that the comments are on both sides of the issue, but what we'll do is endeavor to review and categorize what we've received and provide a report on it at our next meeting. Sir?
You had some serious horsemen weigh in on, I saw some of the letters, I sent them earlier today. I'll get a chance to go through more, but we discussed one or two. You had some very serious horsemen. I think one or two of them are trained veterinarians as well, right? It's coming out very strongly in favor of the Lasix proposal, right?
I think you'll find that there's receipt of comments on both sides of the issue.
All right. Has California enacted their proposals,
They have, I believe it's still pending at this point.
but the track is keeping them?
The track is, they have 6 more days of racing left.
There was talk of a joint, unity sort of thing between a number of racetracks and racing organizations. Are you aware of what's going on with that?
Yeah, that's what initiated our discussion at the
Understood,
last
but I
meeting.
mean, that was then, this is now. Where are we?
Nobody's fractured from that. So the tracks that were originally interested in that type of an approach have remained consistent.
But they haven't done anything.
I don't believe anyone's enacted it yet. Because if you remember, they were all foregoing towards the horses that would be 2-year-olds next year,
Right, but they did, do they have a timeline for acting?
at the beginning of next year.
Okay. And in order to put that into place, when would they, you can't start it January 1st.
It depends.
hope to
If they
put it
were,
into place at some
if they
point.
were utilizing it as house rules, they could do it on their own. If it required legislative or regulatory change in order to implement that, then that might be a little bit more of a lead time.
Are they gonna come out with a document, do you know of, or some?
I don't know.
We don't know what they're doing, okay. They don't know what they're doing yet.
No, I don't know what,
No, but they don't. They're not saying what it is they intend to do, except,
just the pronouncements that we've seen in the press releases.
is it possible they could just sort of say that stuff and then have it go away?
I think that-
Ultimately, the
no,
needle
no, I-
moves somewhere else, and they,
Always possible. I mean, Santa Anita's what focused everyone's attention on it. Santa Anita closes in 6 more racing days,
right,
and the attention of racing will move to the East Coast.
right.
So, if NYRA self-regulates, right, so that would take it out of our purview to some degree. But if they wanted to do it by way of changing regulations and rules, then we would be the monitor on it. Am I
It would
understand
never
that
be out-
correctly?
It would never be out of your purview,
Well,
right? They
that-
can act the way they want to act.
That's correct. There are certain limitations that they can do by themselves. We have an ability to basically overrule any of their house rules through our own rulemaking.
no, I get it, but I mean, if their rules are not using LASIX, or the limitation of the use of LASIX, those would not be any rules that we have in place at this point.
What we would have to do in order for that to be effective is conform some of our LASIX practice rules so that someone who's experimenting with a horse and moving on or off the LASIX list wouldn't be penalized for that experimentation. So we would have to conform in order for that to be effective.
They had a number of more fatalities since they put this into place, right?
At Santa Anita,
In the
yes.
last couple of weeks, days, whatever it is.
It's been a rough meet.
It's been a rough meeting, it's too bad. Well, hopefully we can get some clarity at the next meeting, because, I think that is a very difficult situation out there. The right answer is not totally evident, but some curative action seems warranted, right, Doctor? They had a lot of fatalities at the track, not all of them during racing.
That's true. I think that a challenge in the California situation is that they got off to a pretty bad start with the investigation, and now they've got multiple parties involved. They got the Los Angeles District Attorney's offices involved. The Gaming Commission is involved.
Legislature.
So I know I've talked with Dr. Arthur out there, and they're moving ahead, but it's a slow process. It took us 5 months to do the aqueduct investigation.
Right.
And I don't say it's going to take them 5 months to figure this out, but when you have a large investigation where you have to interview a lot of people, and now there are multiple parties, investigating parties involved, it's going to take some time to get to the bottom of it, but I'm confident that they will.
Do you think they're going to find the causation here?
Yes. I think that there's strong evidence that it's very similar to what happened at Aqueduct. Multiple factors involved in that sense. It's not one thing.
Stuart Janney was part of the HBO piece, and I saw him the other day. He was making a big push for a federal regulatory body versus just a series of state ones. It's an interesting concept. I'm not sure it has legs anywhere, but
Yeah, Stuart Janney is most closely associated outside of NYRA with the Jockey Club.
Jockey Club,
That is
yeah.
something that they've been pressing for probably a half dozen years at this point.
Does it have any traction in Congress?
There's always legislation that's introduced, whether it moves depends upon the Congress.
Anything else?
Sure.
I think that completes our old business. Does anyone have any new business? Since there is no new business to discuss, I believe our secretary will be sending out dates for the next meeting, probably sometime at the end of the month. Correct, Rob?
Yes, we're considering that.
We'll take a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Commissioner Crotty,
So moved.
seconded by Commissioner Snyder. We are adjourned. Thank you all very much.